We're going to go nice and simple today. So it's a nice simple drawing and a nice simple beach scene. This is from Scotland. I think it's actually one of the lochs because I've got a bit of land on the other side. But it's got a really nice hazy sky there. So what I've actually done is I've taken a horizon line about 2/3 down the page. Then I've done a little land line of the hills in the background. I've then taken a water line which actually comes down slightly towards the left and just given a rough idea of where the different colours are coming on the beach. So I've got those lines there. Nice limited colours today. So we've got raw sienna. If you've got Naples yellow and you want to use Naples yellow, you can. I'm using the raw sienna because I know a lot of you won't have the Naples yellow. But the Naples yellow is perfect for the colour of in the sky if you want to use that. I've got cobalt blue with a tiny touch of rose, and then I've got a grey made from a little bit of that cobalt blue and rose and a little bit of sepia. So they're the colours that you need to mix up for now. Okay, so you're going to wet all the way down to your horizon line. So you can come over those distant hills. Make sure you've got a nice layer of water on there. And that's going to give you plenty of time to get a really nice sky in. Make sure your brush is clean. And I'm coming into that raw sienna first of all. And I'm going to bring this just in the area where the hills are. So I'm going to get that really nice glow. Sweep that through. You can come all the way over the hills with it. A little bit more in there. So you've got that glow towards the bottom. Rinse your brush out. And give your cobalt blue a little bit of a mix. Just so that that rose is within there. Remember that the whole point of that tiny bit of rose is if it touches with the raw sienna, it's not going to make a green. So I'm using my round number 10 brush and I'm just sweeping that through. I'm going to come up to the raw sienna but not really mix with it. Just so that I'm getting a really nice base on that top half of the sky. I'm going to rinse my brush again, dry it off, and I'm going to come into the grey. So I've gone quite subtle with the grey. I don't want it to be too strong. I don't want to go too stormy, so I've made it quite diluted today, which means you've got to be a little bit careful about how you're applying it, and you might want to dab a little bit off on kitchen towel as you go. So what I'm doing is I'm following the pattern in the sky of the clouds. I've come in first of all with that sweep across. You want to make sure you leave a little bit of that blue still showing in places, and you can come in onto the raw sienna with this colour, this grey. Might look a little bit brownier, that's fine as well. So circular motions, pushing down with a brush, and think random. nice simple sky, so it should give you plenty of time. If you make sure you get enough water on before you start. So I'm just adding a little bit more to the corners. I'm just watching the paint. I'm going to sweep through this little bit now. I've left that till the very end so that I get that brown effect there in the sky, but I don't want it to flow too much that side. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's all dried off nicely now, so I'm going to swap down to a number 6 and I'm going to come straight onto the paper with dry and the grey mix. So I'm going to come along this distant land line. Now I want this to be quite dark. Work it in stages. So the fact that I've not put any water on will make it much darker. So all about brush control. Try to see the tip of your brush. Try to get as straight a line as possible along that horizon line. And I'm just working, so I'm right-handed, so I've gone left to right, but it honestly doesn't matter, you can go either way. It's a point if I want it to be a little bit lighter, I can take a damp brush in and just touch in. It's got to be damp rather than wet because it'll watermark, but I can just touch in and make that little bit a little bit lighter. So for a damp brush, you just dab it off a little bit on some kitchen towel, rinse your brush, dab it off, and then you can go in and lift a little bit of colour out. So I'm rinsing my brush, and I can just lift a little bit of colour out. There's a bit of mist coming in here, so I'll push the brush in that way. Rinse the brush again, lift a bit out. So dab, rinse, dab, lift a bit out. I've got like a misty effect in places. Just try and get that a little bit straighter there. Okay, so I'll dry that one off. Okay, so we're on to the water now. That's all dry above. So I'm going to come along the water with a little bit of water. Remember that left hand side comes down a little bit. And we're still continuing with these limited colours. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a tiny touch of raw cinnamon. Now I'm less concerned if the water goes a little bit green. I'm just reflecting that colour that I can see in the sky. Just there. Then I'm going to come in with the blue. So I want you to mix through. If you get a hint of green, it's absolutely fine. It works in water, it just doesn't work so well in sky. Try to keep horizontal strokes because that always gives a surface of water. and you can leave tiny little glimmers of light on the horizon. So don't feel you've got to fill in every little bit of white. The same applies on the water. Just make sure you've got a bit of a jaggedy edge happening as we're in these stony bits as you come down. So that'll give a much better effect. Then I'm going to drop down to my number 6. So that was my number 10 I was using first, and I'm back into the grey. I'm just going to sweep a little bit of grey through, just randomly, just to give it a bit more depth. Horizontal strokes again. If when you come on it explodes a little bit, just sweep back through it. Should be nice and subtle because we've kept the colour quite light. Pop a little bit down here. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so back in with your number 6 and a little bit of the grey, and I'm just doing a few little bits of ripples. I'm just concentrating where these bits of stone are that you can see in the water. There's not really much other definition, it's quite distant. Then I'm going to rinse my brush, and just underneath each of those I'm wetting so that they're starting to soften in. So I've got one side hard, one side soft. Just going to give me a little bit of definition when I come in to put those rocks in a bit later. Okay, I think you can just about see that. It's quite dull today. Okay, so I'll dry that one off quickly. Okay, so that's dry now, and we're going to get a base on the beach area. So I'm wetting all over this beach area. Plenty of water again. And I'm back to my round number 10. And raw sienna first of all. So the raw sienna I'm not going to take all over. So the way the beach is looking, it's more sandy coloured towards the water, and then it's greyer, and then it goes a bit sandy coloured again. So it's where the stones are that I don't want to put the raw sienna. So I'm going to come in with a bit here as well. Rinse brush out, and I'm coming into the blue. So it's that blue mix from the sky, and then bring that around about where the stones are. You can add to it later. And I'm also going to take a little bit just through near the water's edge. I've got a bit of a dry line just up near the water's edge. It's not a problem at this point. I'm just getting this base on. I'm just touched in to a little bit of rose. Now I want to spread this rose, so I had a lot of water on my brush, touched into a tiny bit of neat rose, and I'm spreading it through this sandy bit. So it should look a lot more peachier, and then the same applies at the bottom here. If you go on and it goes too rosy, then take a little bit more of the raw sienna on and mix that through. We definitely don't want pure rose on the picture, it's more peachier. Then I just want you to sweep through with a little bit of the grey mix. This is the first layer, so we're going to add a lot more definition. So I'm sweeping through with a bit of the grey there. A bit of the grey towards the front. And a bit of the grey within the blue. Now when you take it within this blue section, I want you to randomly dab so that you don't eliminate all the blue. So you want less sort of strokes, more dabbing in that section. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so we're going to tackle this now in a couple of different sections. What I've got is a number 6 brush and some neat sepia. I'm just going to come in and just create a few rocks in the water. Now if you make sure when you're popping these little rocks in that you're popping them where you've popped those grey lines, that will help them to be grounded in there. If you're still not sure, then rinse your brush, dab it off, and just very carefully hit the bottom corner of either side and just stroke outwards, and that'll just give a little bit more shadow as to where the rock is in the water. That will just help ground your rocks. If we can get a close-up of that. So I'm hitting that bottom left corner. Along on this one, bottom right corner, and that will just help ground them in with that sepia as well. So this sepia is pretty much neat. I'm just dabbing my brush into water, so it's my round number 6, and then straight into some neat sepia. And what I'm going to do is just come along this edge. So we're going to start placing in all these rocks. So you're going to want this line to be nice and dark. I think look carefully at the line. So what you will see is it's not dark all the way along. What you've got is a little bit of wet sand, a little bit of shadow, a little bit of rock. So don't feel that you're going to do one blobby line all the way along. Think rocks and start to pop them in. So I'm working left to right again, and just periodically I'm going to rinse my brush, dab it off, and just do that same thing, which is just touching a few of the corners and the base. What it's doing is it's grounding that in, grounding it so that it's on the beach, giving it a shadow. The more shadow you've got, the less hovering. Because the paint's quite thick, it shouldn't run that far when you pop that on, so just do it in little sections like that. So I'm going to come along and do this bit. So a couple of weeks ago when we did that rocky one, we had a few struggles. There were some Loch Ness monsters appearing and all sorts, so we can try again with this one. Rocks are notoriously tricky to do, but these are a bit more distant, so this should, in theory, be a bit easier. So it is a bit darker on this middle section, so I'm going to bring that down. To eliminate some of that white as well that I'd left there. So you can see that I'm using my brush upright. The tip of the brush is creating those jaggedy bits on the rocks. If you want to give a sense of distance, if it's thicker here and slightly thinner as you come away, you'll get a much more feeling of perspective and distance there. So it's worth just checking that as you come down, because those little tweaks make all the difference. I've made it a bit thicker there, a bit thinner there. You'll get that sense of distance. Rinse my brush out really well. Dab it off on a little bit of kitchen towel, and then that same thing. I'm just going to touch some of the bottom edges, just to ground it in a bit. Okay, so we're on to the next stage now, and what I've done is I've covered the sky and water up so that I don't end up splattering, and I'm going to come down very carefully, so you need to make sure this bit's nice and dry over the beach area again. It actually doesn't matter if it lifts a little bit. It's not like we're doing when we did the glaze on the apples, it's not like that, so you can be a little bit more reckless. So I've taken water over. I'm going to come over with that grey mix first of all. So I'm coming right near where those rocky bits are. I'm using a number 6 because it'll flow less. And I just want to give a little bit more depth on this area. So it's the area just below the rocky area, just near the water. And I want that to have a nice soft line as it's coming in to the lighter sandy area. It's just giving that a little bit more depth there. I'm also going to do the same in this bottom section here. So just add a bit more depth and build up those layers. So this is that warmer sandy area just down here. It's probably a touch too warm, so this depth will really help. Make sure you leave a little bit of that colour coming through. Then I've got some tools of choice here. So the first thing I'm showing you is a little bit of sponge. So if you've done beaches, pebble beaches with me before, you'll have a bit of this. It's one of those cheap honeycomb type sponges that you get from a pound shop or Home Bargains. You usually get 2 for £1, and I chop them up and you get different size pebbles. The other thing I've got to hand is a cotton bud, and the other thing I've got to hand is a palette knife. If you haven't got a palette knife, do not worry, you can just use a brush. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a little bit of splattering with the palette knife. So I've got some paint on there, bring it nice and close, splatter. This is why I covered up the water and the sky. So dip the little bit of paint, dipped, splatter. You can do this whilst it's still damp, which is what I'm doing now, so they get a softer effect and a bit more texture, and you can do it when it's dry later as well. This is probably not the best thing to be doing near the bedroom carpet. So I'm getting bits within this section as well, in the blue section, little bits within the sandy section. It all starts to come together. Your cotton bud is a way of lifting out. So if you want to start to lift out some lighter pebbles, I'm thinking more in the background here. So in this section here, I might want to lift out a couple of lighter stones, and then I'm going to dab in so this sponge is dry, and I'm dabbing into the paint. I'm just starting to create some shapes. Right, it's a little bit wet, so I'll pause a second and then come back. Okay, so I'm back now. It's very nearly dry. You want it to still have a little bit of softness, but there's actually no sheen really left on this paper now. And I'm coming along and I'm dabbing. You'll see up here that I've practiced and I've found the side of the sponge that works the best. And I don't want you to worry about making exact round circles. What you're doing is giving an impression of, and then you're going to be able to work with that to make that random pattern. If when you come on, because I'm using this grey here, you think, oh, that looks too dark, or I've left it too long and it's too dry, then use your spritzer a little bit, just dampen it down. You can see I'm doing the same thing as I did with the sponging last week. I'm dabbing and I'm turning the sponge and then I'm dabbing again, so every single section is a little bit different. And all you're wanting to do is get a nice pattern in that middle area that's going to look like pebbles. So it's giving you the base of your pebbles. whilst it's still on this section, so I've lifted out a couple of little bits with a cotton bud. They probably won't lift out anymore now because it's nearly dry. So I've got some lighter ones. You can come back in. So I'm still on that grey. And just create a little bit more texture in that background area. You could do this with a toothbrush as well. Have it really close and pull the bristles towards you with your thumb, and that's a really good way of doing this sort of splattering technique as well. It's just finding the tool that works for you. Let me show you with a brush, just so you've got an idea of how to do it with a brush. It's always a bit trickier with a brush. So I'm getting a few bigger ones here, which will be nice in that background area. You can see why you've got to cover the rest of it up. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off and then we'll put the final bits on. Okay, so we know from anybody that's done the pebbles before that it's very easy now to get carried away and end up with a pattern on the paper. So the first thing I want you to do is, with these lifted out pebbles at the back, is to put a little bit of shadow underneath. So this is just a round number 6 with a little bit of the grey, and I'm just coming underneath at the bottom, and that will then help that pebble to stand out. I don't think you can really see that very well from the camera. So you can see I've come underneath here. It's so subtle and the light's not so sunny today. So you've got those little bits to stand out. Go back this way. And then we can come in and start to define some better areas of these pebbles. So you can start to pick a few out. When you do this, less is more. So take little sections and just come under the underside edge, if I can say that, the bottom bit of the pebble. Then you're not going to be coming around every single pebble and outlining it. And as you start to do this, they'll become a little bit more defined. Continue with the grey. Because the grey is the same colour, it won't stand out too much. So you're going to do little random clusters. On the underside edge. What should happen is you'll have some sponging on the other side, and that will all help to join it all together. So I'm going to do a few of them and I'll come back to you. Okay, so I've got quite a few with underside edges done. I'm going to just drop in whilst it's still a tiny bit damp. Doesn't matter if it's dried off. Just a little bit of sepia in places. If we'd gone round all of these with the sepia, they'd really stand out and it would look like we've made a pattern. So I'm just choosing where it might be darkest on the bits that I've underlined, and just dabbing a little bit in places just to help it shoot forward. If it's dry, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. Just dab a little bit in a place and it'll still hold together as a bit of additional shadow. And then what you can do as well is to take the blue that you've been using, because what we've been doing there is negative painting. We've been painting the background to form the pebbles, and we've done the same with the sponge. So what we can do as well now is to paint a few pebbles in with the blue. Now the blue needs to be quite watery. So don't go on with bright blue. At this stage you should be nearly out of the blue if you've mixed it up and not remixed it. So just a little bit, and you can paint a few pebbles, and that again will give an extra dimension. Still not in a pattern. Remember that you're using the randomness of the sponge to create these pebbles. So you shouldn't actually now be looking at the photograph. You should be looking at what the sponge has done on your paper and trying to pull out random pebbles. Try to keep a few together. Try to pull out where you can't really see what's happened with the sponge. That's usually quite a good one. To then think, oh, I'm going to make a couple of blue pebbles there because it's not really showing anything. But remember, as you go further back, those pebbles need to be smaller. And then I can do that again with the raw sienna. So I can pull out a few with the raw sienna. Don't be afraid to touch into some of the blue areas again. You'll get a nice mix whilst it's damp. Actually, if you don't think about it too much with the raw sienna, it will probably work better. Just dab on in places. So that you don't get bogged down with the detail of this. Okay, so that's working quite nicely. So the last bit that I want to do is to sweep it again a bit more depth. I'm just going to wet this section again. It's still not dark enough, and this layering technique just builds it up gradually. So I've just swept a little bit more of the water just on this warm area. And it's also giving you an opportunity to define where the pebbles come to. So I'm sweeping on with the grey. Sweep onto this bottom section. So that's giving that a little bit more depth, and then I'm going to take a little bit of sepia in, just whilst it's still damp, just under some of these pebbles. You don't want to end up with one long line, but it's a way of, again, just adding a little bit more definition, just to break that edge up. And give you an effect. I'm going to have to twiddle this way. Pebbles. I'm going to sweep a bit of that way. See, that's made a huge effect to bringing that forward. It's that whole dark against the lighter tone and bringing that forward. Just think random. And then I can just sweep in a couple of lines. Okay, so that one's all done. It's a bit wonky there. I hope you've enjoyed it. See you next week. Bye.